Hi, I'm Daz Greenwood, a scientist here at the MIT Media Lab, and I want to welcome everybody online to the inaugural day of the MIT Legal Forum. So we're just about to get started now with a keynote by Sandy Pentland. Stand by. Is the camera okay now?
I can tell that the slides are up.
I'm sorry?
The slides are reading backwards. So
Okay. Okay, here we go. Nice.
Who likes purple? Everybody likes purple. Yeah. Prince. Okay. So. Very good.
hands down.
All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome. I'm Daz Greenwood, and Michael and I. Michael, well, and you are.
I'm Michael Casey.
And we are both researchers here at the MIT Media Lab who are, well, I guess I'll first say, very happy to welcome you here. Our research involves blockchain, law, computation. And this is our effort to reach out to the legal industry, to the legal field, to help to catalyze a conversation around transformation of the field from the perspective of what I think we would call computational social science. And the Digital Currency Initiative, I'm not sure exactly how you'd say it. Michael, could you just introduce yourself and welcome folks?
So, hi, I'm Michael Casey. I'm a senior advisor at the Digital Currency Initiative. I think computational social science is actually a great way to describe it because it is the blockchain that we're interested in is something far bigger, I believe, than just the technological layer. It embraces governance of communities, and it folds that into software structures. So I think that's actually a good way to describe what this is all about and why exploring the interfacing of that with the law is going to be so critical in terms of how we actually get to implement some of the cool things that we think this technology can do.
Good. Okay, so mental note, you're also computational social science, so it's spreading, Sandy. So computational social science is a application of analytics, data, I guess I would say, in a sense, evidence and science-based descriptive and predictive models to social scientists, to people. The field was largely created by Media Lab's own Sandy Pentland and a number of other data scientists, social scientists, and it's obviously beginning to catch on. It turns out that the law is also considered a social science. I read it on Wikipedia, among other things. And so when Sandy gives his keynote in a few moments, please listen for the advances, I think remarkable advances that have been made in other fields and in breakthroughs with utilizing social physics, as we call it, to unlock potential of people in the economy and in education, transportation, so many different sectors, and be listening. What could this mean in the fullness of time for the law? And then, following out of Sandy's keynote, we're going to do some orientation. You'll hear some lightning talks of people that are describing breakout sessions. And our method's going to be to have people break into small discussion groups in the sort of banquet room. around core areas of law, and look at the application of blockchain and AI specifically. And then the cross themes of identity. We have a number of, like the identirati here, who can guide us, and contracts. So those are sort of our axes. And then see if we can't unpack and reveal where some of the core, let's say, nexus points are that we can carry forward into your professions and into our research here, and help to really spark that at another level, a coherent, deliberate, systemic transformation of law for the digital age. So with that, it's my real pleasure to introduce Sandy Pentland and my boss to talk to us about social physics.
Okay, sure. So, I just wanted to say a couple words to kick things off here. Let's see, well, this is going to be creative. Okay, that's fine. I wonder if this thing works. Okay, wow. So, I wanted to sort of stretch your mind a little bit just to begin with, before you get into more sort of details. And what I want to talk about is this notion of social physics. Social physics is where we got the notion of the census 200 years ago. The notion that somehow data and statistics, algorithms, could determine the way that we govern ourselves. And it fell out of use because it seemed a little too grand in 1840 when our statistics were just beginning and we didn't know much about surveys and so forth either. But today we have tremendous data. We have things to keep track of things like blockchain that are nominally incorruptible. We have machine learning. So it's a whole new game. And that's what I hope to get out of here. You guys are thinking. And I just want to start off by talking about a couple of places where I'm particularly interested. I'm on the board of directors for the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And what that unit is charged with doing is getting all the national statistical units, offices in the world, to begin measuring far more about human life than they ever had before. Things like inequality, things like stress levels, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm also advisor of the American Bar Association, and the discussion there is, can we set up an online learning program that covers all these new technologies and what should be in it and how should it be structured? So I'd be interested in hearing about that. The thing that drives a lot of this from my point of view is the fact that suddenly we have data about everything, all this transactional data, but also all the things that come up, cell phones, credit cards, and so forth, which means you can know in very fine grain anything about a person's life, about the society. Well, yeah, there are people who aren't on the grid, as it were, but that's rapidly changing, and it's changing to a shocking degree everywhere in the world. So, for instance, in the recent creation of the Sustainable Development Goals, a committee that I was part of put together something we call the World That Counts. It was pointing out that this data is something that we have to use if we're going to take on things like Sustainable Development Goals. Goals like justice, goals like equality, sustainability. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the world to begin to measure these things. And in fact, the Sustainable Development Goals include just shy of 200 measurements that every country needs to make, every country is committed to make about the quality of their society. And those measurements use things like satellite data, like cell phone data, like credit card data, like administrative data, to be able to ask all of these questions. And what's really interesting is this is not just an informational resource. This is tied up to financial aid and to access to markets and other things. So large donors, many large international organizations are beginning to require that this data be done in an honest, transparent, and a believable way, before the citizens of this nation have access to international resources. In other words, international law is becoming datafied. It's becoming driven by these new measurements. Well, you may say, oh, okay, so that's a big thing, lots of discussion, but you know, the same thing is happening everywhere. For me, having been in this sort of development area for a long time, I remember 15 years ago, everyone talked about how half the people in the world had never made a phone call, and today over 80% of the people own a phone, which means that you know where they are, who their friends are, you know a lot about their economic status, a lot about their health, on and on and on. And you can begin measuring these things. So for instance, we just completed a study with the government of Mexico about a program called Prospera. It's an aid program for pregnant women, but it uses phone data to be able both to measure and to advise, so it's sort of a control loop, for pregnant women to be able to get adequate prenatal care and to make sure that their kids go to school. Something that we would endorse, I think, generally. I think if the kids go to school and so forth, they get a check every couple of weeks. But what this means is that these sorts of systems, which are automatic systems with computers using data, access, being able to get punishments and so forth, are beginning to spread everywhere. So, so they're continuously visible measurement of 3 billion people's lives. So in China, for instance, where I just set up a new lab to investigate these sorts of things, many cities have no cash at all. Everything is done by phone. For all purchases, all transportation, all communication. And all of that data is used to determine your credit rating, your access, your social standing, your legal standing, as an automatic thing. And all of that data is used to determine your credit rating, your access, social standing, your legal standing. Program. Because in fact, it's very effective at getting services to young kids and pregnant women. We recoil when you hear the notion that these same data are being used to ensure that people are, quote unquote, a good citizen. The sort of things that are happening. And of course, in this country, it's not quite as explicit to that, but through economic means, you see the same sorts of things. You begin to see more and more systems that are automatic like that. And the question is how are we going to actually make sure that these are systems that are fair, have access to everybody, and what we want? There has to be some way of actually ensuring that the law keeps up with this automaticity driven evolution. So all interested in blockchain, all interested in AI, that's great, but those are the little building blocks of a much bigger system. A much bigger system is something you could call implicit or automatic law, where all parts of your life are regulated by measurements made by sensors and computers. Where are the humans in that? Months ago, I keynoted the opening of the presidency of the EU. Work that we do in this area, and they're very concerned about this, in part because of the privacy law, which requires a great deal more tagging and tracking of data and much more explicit consent. And what that can lead to, if done wrong, is much more sort of big brother oversight. And the thing was held in Estonia, and Estonia is a marvelous place in terms of digital identity and efficiencies of the systems. But surprisingly, the way their system is set up, it looks like our version of 1984. The government knows everything, has everything, controls everything, which is odd for an ex-Soviet state, I suppose. Maybe it's natural for them. But anyway, so these are the sorts of issues that I hope that you'll keep in the back of your brain as we move forward. Thank you. Just take a couple minutes. I'll get you people ready.
Very good.
Great. So because Andy's so concise, we have him for a few more minutes until 9:30. Let's take advantage of it. Some questions? No. Sure. Could you introduce yourself? I'm sorry. Let me say we're live casting this onto our YouTube station. Be aware of that. And if you don't want to be caught in a stream or something, let me know, and we can actually create a place in the back of the room. But as part of our registration, one of the things that people were supposed to have clicked was sort of a video consent and a Creative Commons license. So if I won't put everyone on the spot now, but be aware of that. And having said that, please share your question with the world.
Hi, thanks. My name is David Northforce. I co-founded something we call Innovation Jobs with FinSec. So my question is, I'm also a physicist, so I'm interested in the word social physics. Now you said you have all the data and so on. What's the physics? Do you actually run real physics, or is it other type of math?
It looks a lot like spin glass math. So what you've got, except that it's heterogeneous, so it's not a uniform medium. People are not a uniform medium. And the other thing about it is because it's heterogeneous, the estimation problem is really different. The parameters for every item are different, right? Like you're different than me because items getting estimated. But that's the type of thinking for it. And then what you ask is about how do these things aggregate and you get emergent phenomena. So how do you get phase transitions and stuff like that? So the difference between, there's another technical term called sociophysics, which is like macroeconomics, and this is sort of microeconomics, if you would. Okay? That may have not been interesting to most of you, but basically, it's possible to model at a very fine grain people's interactions. And as an example, something you won't probably know is that Amazon has a model of you and everybody who sells everything on Amazon running in the background continuously to see what your typical behavior is, and that's the way they detect fraud. So they model in real time the entire world. That's not too much of an overstatement, the entire American world, so that they know where things need to be for shipping, what you're likely to buy, what your credit rate. This is not so far from what you see in China, except they're using it for a benevolent purpose, which is detecting fraud. And in fact, they have almost an order of magnitude lower fraud than most of the payment companies because of this. And that's where Amazon Cloud came from, incidentally. Is they need to stamp out fraud by modeling the entire country.
Okay. Okay, that's mine.
Hi everyone, my name is Benjamin Pan. I'm from Yahoo Capital of Shanghai. My question is that you just mentioned you set up a lab or center to analyze, study the Chinese data like WeChat or social media. I wonder, as a foreign institute, how can you do the research or studies over Chinese data information, because it's really highly regulated.
Yeah. So the lab I set up is sponsored by the Secretary General and the former mayor of Beijing, and sponsored by China Construction Bank, the former head of China Construction Bank. So it's their way of setting up, of ingesting knowledge about, for instance, social physics and some of the reasoning and some of the systems that are being developed in other parts of the world. And from my point of view, I think that there's too little dialogue between China and the United States. And it would be useful to know what different communities think about some of these same issues. So,
sorry, just follow up the policy issue. I have another question that, as we know, it costs lots of workforce and the money to generate the big data. But now there's so many database available, but some of them are just restricted by either company or government. My question is that is it possible for the data in future can be shared among all the companies or organizations if it's not a privacy problem? You know?
So the systems that we are deploying, which are sponsored by, for instance, France, the World Bank, and people like that, are for exactly that. So in Senegal and in Colombia, we will have by the end of the year a data sharing system that allows private data from telcos and banks and other people to be made public, very much like census data, so that you can see where the people are and where they go in aggregate. And that'll be used for transportation planning, for income inequality programs, for things like that. The general structure is being sponsored by a variety of companies and governments because it permits greater data sharing. The key thing there is twofold. One is that data sharing, the principal thing that's difficult about data sharing are the legal questions. It's very, no, I'm not going to give you my data. That's just not going to happen. But I might be willing to answer questions about my data. And that's a much simpler legal negotiation. And so that's called a federated data system. And that's what we're creating with help of some of the people here in the room. And what that allows is much more liquid sharing of data for whatever purposes. Also, if done correctly, it allows auditing of the data transfers, which means that you can have human oversight to be able to judge whether algorithms are discriminatory or fair or whatnot. Because you can see the questions that were asked, the data that were used, and the answers that were generated. So the system is called Open Algorithms. You can see it online if you'd like. It's OPAL project.org. Or here at MIT, the infrastructure is trust.MIT.edu.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Sandy. Sure. All right, Sandy Pentland. I'm going to ask Michael to join me one more time. And we are, thanks to the Sandy's schedule conflict, I think that we can be like about 20 minutes ahead of schedule. And what my suggestion is going to be is when Michael and I talk you through the flow of the day, we'd like to provide two things. Number one, allocate about half of that so you can hear more on these lightning talks about the specific topics and breakout sessions and the facilitators that we have, and actually give a little bit more time for Q&A so that you can make more powerful choices after lunch about what groups you'd like to sit with, and also to maybe help surface the core ideas or problems or questions that you have. I see so many people I want to talk to you out here. Hi, everybody, by the way. I'm really glad to have you back here. Awesome. Thanks, James. All right. So, come here, Michael. All right. So, Michael, maybe walk people a little bit and tell maybe what we do here. What is this method of the workshop that creates this?
Sure. Yeah, so the workshop is a great way for us to kind of collectively draw out the sort of joint wisdom, if you like, in the room, in the sense that it's kind of like a lazy form of academic work, because we get you guys to do all the thinking for us. But collectively, our brain power should be more constructive than just having one person talking at you in the room. So the workshop effort is to sort of lay out a set of problems, to talk through the parameters of what they are, to then, in the process, you explore some of those questions, and we kind of effectively, whiteboard them and hopefully come up with ways to define what certain solutions to these problems can be. And of course, in this case, we're talking about trying to put legal definitions on some of the emerging concepts that are coming out of this space, trying to find ways to tackle from the legal perspective what some of these new concepts are. So just to give you a sense, I'm not involved in the AI side of things, I'm the blockchain guy. We are grappling with things like the notion of a digital asset. So for the first time ever, thanks to this concept of the ending double spending, the idea that we can create something of value that can't be replicated for the first time ever. We have digital scarcity, which means we have a digital asset. But how do we define that in legal terms is one of these issues. There's jurisdictional questions that we want to be exploring about where does the buck stop, where does the authority lie when you have a blockchain that is validating facts anywhere in the world at any given time. How do we grapple with the idea of where that data, where that power, where that authority lies? There's questions around property, there's questions around possession and ownership that come from the notion of an asset being represented in digital form, and then ownership and control of it being applied to the control of your private key. Where do we draw that distinction between the passage of physical possession and ownership with this very sort of digital dematerialized concept of what it's all about? There's a whole lot of big questions, and they feed their way into some specific use cases, which we'll be dealing with in the workshops.
Exactly. Thank you. I'm glad we're recording this. So that was sort of best of the stuff I get all the time here when people look at me and they ask me like they want an answer to ownership. They want an answer to jurisdiction. They want an answer to the questions of even encapsulating the rights and obligations of parties in a system, an automated entity that nonetheless is legal and soon be sued. So we've got a lot of ringers here that are on our team for the law. I see Cam Perry is with us now, who's a member of Sandy's team as well, former general counsel at the Department of Commerce, and does a lot of work in some of those issues. We've got other folks in the room, Gabe Tenenbaum, who's a visiting professor from Suffolk Law this semester in Sandy's group. Jonathan Askin, professor of law from Brooklyn Law School, who's visiting professor last year. So we've got some depth and many others, but we don't have the answer. So there's a little bit of a selfish motive, as Michael was saying, which is that there's a groundbreaking work happening here across the Media Lab. Sandy Pentland's group with computational everything, and in Digital Currency Initiative with blockchain on everything. What we would like to do is now have more of a regular liaise with the field of law to talk about in a structured way what some of these, Michael called them use cases. We're going to call them scenarios today, but they are, and to talk about them in a way where we can all play. So our method is going to be, and I don't know if you can see up here, what we're doing next, and we'll accelerate a little bit, is we'll set the terms of the day, and then we're going to do some lightning talks. We're going to hear about some scenarios that are under discussion. Our method is anchor scenarios. Here we go. So one scenario is data protection. Another one is legal entities, bankruptcy, supply chain, VAT, energy, immigration, litigation, state crowdfunding. What these things have in common is, you'll notice they're not, every one of these is basically a rudiment of law. Something you might see in a first year law school class, and we're going to have property, contract, bankruptcy, legal entities. This is a good place, we are speculating, we want to explore with you to ground a use case in a legal fact pattern and some business context, so that we can have a shared reference point to anchor discussion. In this way, we are seeking to be able to unleash everything the MIT people and the other technologists and the legal people can bring, and be talking apples to one another. So we start from a well-settled, well-understood, stable area of law with 2 or 3 words, and then we build the use case on that. So Michael will talk soon about a very interesting solar grid blockchain use case, where you could be thinking, we might have said public utilities, or we might have said any number of things. We called it energy, was the way that we came at it. But there's we want to start to answer some of these questions in the context of fact patterns. And the last thing I'll say is that because
always, with I'm answering questions, I'm going to answer questions, we always say it depends. It depends on whatever it depends on. That depends on what other things depend on. As a matter of just scope to integrate legal and technical use cases with business cases, we've been looking at bar exam questions and law school exam questions, but specifically bar exam questions. We've been strip mining a bunch of them in each of the areas, and some areas that we're not doing this today, to figure out the level of abstraction and the kinds of questions that are answerable, like after the story, like what are Alice's rights against Bob? What are Bob's defenses? Can Bob get his car back? Can Alice get a refund? We know that these kinds of questions are answerable sufficiently so that the field of law will adjudicate that you can practice law after our exam. I'm just going to go on a small limb to say that ought to be good enough for us to be able to say we have now incorporated all of the dependencies. We know the main factors that answering this question ought to depend upon legally, the main ones, and thus to have a reasonable conversation, not legal advice, but to achieve, and here comes, so listen to the next, like, 2 words, 3 words, predictable legal results. That's where we're heading. So by the time we get to the end of Tuesday, we've got the report back from discussion groups with these great technologies grounded in common contexts, the more we can share good ideas or even open key questions we need to answer in order to achieve predictable legal results, the more I believe we will fulfill the potential of getting together today and catalyzing a conversation that is going to be worth continuing, taking back to your various contexts and fields, and law firms and professions, and also perhaps continuing on in different ways. We'll hear about tomorrow, we'll see later today at MIT. So that's the big level of what's happening. So now, thank you, Michael. And so let's thank Michael again. He's I'd like to ask Christian Smith to come up. We're going to go a little faster. And also from IBM Watson, Brian and Shauna. Or actually, you can come up when Christian's done. So the next session is kind of twofer. Come on up, Christian. I'll set your slides up. And I promised you that we'd be doing some level setting. And so, we are. Let me get down here. So this session is fundamentally about, I think you're here, right? Do you present? Here's the clicker. You got your mic. So what we're trying to do now is first Christian, who's you'll introduce yourself, but he's one of my go-to engineers here at MIT and in the Media Lab when I want to rapid prototype something with blockchain or with authentication technologies especially. Great guy and understands this stuff. We were talking with Bob Craig from Baker Hostetler, and also a member of our program committee who you will all meet going into lunch, about the program. When Christian was talking about some common myths and some misconceptions or some confusion around what blockchain technology is, what it does and doesn't do, the sorts of capabilities it has that are well suited for business problems, and even for legal requirements, because we've been doing quite a few prototypes like that, and the kind of capabilities that aren't well suited, that just don't get you those results. And Bob thought that was amazing. That was great, and so did other people as we socialized. And so we decided to have a quick session between starting with Christian here on blockchain, and then Brian and Shauna from IBM on AI, about methods for eliciting, methods for distinguishing what technology does, and a method to identify good fits for technology and business contexts. So let's start with some level setting on blockchain. So, Christian, you're up.
Is this working? Okay. So there was a less polite title suggested by some people for this talk, and this is what we settled on. I'm told the purpose of this conference is to help transform law in a beneficial way, and it's happening now because there's a renaissance of technology that's particularly suited to many aspects of the law. Don't qualify that and say I'm not a lawyer, definitely a hacker, so I don't know what I'm talking about there. But there are some serious risks that come along with these technologies too. And that's why Daz asked me to come here to highlight some of those things that need to be better understood. And the people in this room, as I understand it, are a critical part of the adult supervision that's helping to shape our future. So it's especially important that everyone here can cut through the hyperbole and exercise some good judgment when it comes to aligning technology and law. So we're going to talk about some pitfalls and misunderstandings in blockchain, and in particular in blockchain. And this isn't to discourage anyone, but hopefully empowers you to think better about this stuff going forward. And given the tools, I think everyone here is quite capable of distinguishing between signal and noise. So let's take a sober look at what blockchain is and isn't, what it can and can't do, why you want to use it, and how to evaluate some of the wild claims that people make about it. To kick it off, I have a question for you. Wait, which one is? Aha. So, what do you think the blockchain is? Someone asked me this about a year ago, and it really stuck in my head. This is a terribly misguided question. And I don't mean to pick on the person who asked it because, we all start somewhere, but it does illustrate incredibly well the degree of confusion we have in the current public discourse. This question is troubling in two ways. First, fuzzy terms like the blockchain are really vague and overloaded to the point of being meaningless. And second, the definition of a blockchain shouldn't really be all that philosophical, debatable, or open to interpretation. All this vagueness and subjectivity is a real issue. It's hard to talk about concrete problems and opportunities when words can be just about anything. So we need to define some of these things. The blockchain. Blockchain is not a proper noun. When you talk about cryptocurrencies and smart contracts, digital autonomous organizations, consensus protocols, there are lots of variations on the idea of distributed ledgers. And there's Bitcoin and Ethereum, Zcash, lots of hyperledger projects like Corda, Fabric, and Indy. But there is no such thing as the blockchain. At best, this is an overgeneralization. At worst, it's a false idol. The blockchain is about as real as Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy. And there are probably some people that want to kill me for saying stuff like this, but I'm saying it anyway. It just doesn't exist in the way that so many people use the term these days. So what the heck is it? Well, first and foremost, it's a data structure. It's a data structure that can be cryptographically verified to ensure its integrity. The cryptography used is not particularly novel. We've had the main primitives used in blockchains for decades. The most important ones are hashes and signatures. Hashes are used for verifying the integrity of data. Signatures are used for verifying the authenticity of it. The data structure we build up represents information chronologically in the order it's added. This serves as a tamper-proof ledger. We share a copy of that with everyone concerned. It could be open to the world, or it could be access controlled. Either way, the ledger is replicated in its entirety between many parties and kept in sync over time. The particularly novel thing about this is that each party with a copy need not trust any one of the others. Open public ledgers use a multi-party algorithm called a consensus protocol. The consensus protocol prevents bad information from being recorded onto the ledger. It ensures validity, integrity, authenticity, and consistency of the ledger across replicas over time. In the case of Bitcoin, this protocol solves a specific problem called the double spend problem. You don't want people to spend their money twice. If you want to dig deep on this, read up on Byzantine fault tolerance. So there's a working definition of a blockchain. Let's reiterate. We can talk about data structures, cryptography, consensus. We can talk about legal requirements, security goals, and threat models. We can talk about specific protocols and software and networks. But let's not talk about the blockchain in the abstract. There's no such mystical superpower that obsoletes mathematics and the laws of physics and solves every problem we feel like invoking it over. So now we have a working definition. What should we use it for? And some startling news. Ledgers don't replace every other technology that ever existed. They're not suitable for solving every single problem, and they're particularly poorly suited for solving some problems. The overwhelming focus on distributed ledgers at this time in history is understandable because they are amazing, but it's also leading to some absurd applications. Have you guys heard of the latest celebrity ICOs? The New York Times should get Understatement of the Year award for saying it's not always clear what they're selling. It's probably fair to say right now, if what you're doing in technology doesn't somehow involve blockchain, it won't get any attention at all. And because of that, everyone has kind of a perverse incentive to blockchainify all their ideas and ventures and products. And it kind of reminds you of the old saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. There are a couple simple questions that we need to ask about whether or not we should use a tool. One is, can we use this? And sometimes you can, but it's not necessarily a good fit. This is swatting flies with a sledgehammer. And the next question is, should we? Sometimes it's actually dangerous or harmful to use a tool for something in ways that we may not expect or be able to predict. All too often, people ignore the bad fit that they identified with the first question and then skip the second one altogether. We'll dive deeper on what you should and shouldn't do with blockchain in a minute, but first let's cover some important things to keep in mind when evaluating products for specific use cases. Every new technology goes through a hype cycle. In the beginning, nobody cares about it. Then something really hits and the herd comes thundering in. Everyone starts reinventing everything they do around loosely defined and dramatically misunderstood buzzwords. The market gets ahead of itself and people start taking crazy business and financial risks. Alan Greenspan called this irrational exuberance, if you guys remember back in the dot-com days. And you all know what the stock chart looks like. It's a big hockey stick, and it comes crashing down. Usually, just when you start thinking, this time it's really different, then there's the bust. So there are a lot of examples of this kind of herd behavior throughout history. In 1637, there was tulip mania. People got really excited about speculating on tulips. There were gold rushes in the New World, the same kind of thing happened. There was an AI boom in the 80s, dot-com bubble in the 90s, we had a housing bubble in the last decade, and we could be leading up to something like that here as well. It doesn't mean that there isn't great, vast potential in this, but we may be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. The next thing to think about is FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This particular hype cycle is scaring the crap out of some deep-pocketed companies and industries, even governments. Nobody wants to be in the business of selling handmade buggy whips when upstart competitors are using assembly lines to crank out automobiles. So people are wondering if this stuff is for real, how does it work, is it going to replace us, should we buy in, do we even have a future, who moved our cheese? And there's a lot of fear and a lot of money behind it, and people are looking for answers. So it's kind of an existential crisis for many companies that are sort of vested interests. And there's a kind of hustler that preys on this, which brings us to the next topic, which is snake oil. When you put fear and hype together with an excess of money, what could possibly go wrong? Times like these, you can fog a mirror, you can get funded. And so it's snake oil salesmen and earnest but overconfident people that show up along with the very authentic and genuine ventures. So easy capital, it empowers charlatans and dilettantes as well as the genuine articles. So you guys should pay attention and think about that. I mean, not everyone is, but at least consider it. And the reason is because at the earliest stages of any project or venture, it's very difficult to distinguish promising work from weaker attempts. And that is because of vapor. Not all marketing around undeveloped or underdeveloped ideas is bad. It's valid to test the market for a product or service before you take big risks. And we need to assess the level of interest among early customers before we can go and get capital. There's an entire school of thought around this. It's called the lean startup. And this is totally legit. It's actually kind of scientific method applied to creating new businesses. But we have to recognize that many of the things we hear about aren't real yet, and some never will be. So brings us to another question. How do we know what's real and what's not? When it comes to distributed ledgers, I can give you a couple of hints. Obvious one is repeated references to the blockchain without any other meaningful context. Might be suspect. Circular arguments that answer why blockchain with because the blockchain blah, blah, blah. You have to look at those very carefully. Sometimes they're pretty sophisticated, but they can be circular. And another one is when someone says, just hash it and put it on the blockchain. This one is so common, I'm devoting an entire slide to it. It's kind of a running joke among hackers around here. But it's also a good heuristic. Pay extra attention when someone says, just hash it and put it on the blockchain. Recording a hash of some data by itself is completely useless. The context and the purpose matters. And the acid test is to ask why. If someone can't give you a solid reason and explain how this solves a specific problem, they're almost certainly full of crap. The most important thing with the noise, though, is to listen to your instincts. You have the same intrinsic powers of reason as everyone else, and they are good. In fact, most of you here have probably developed them much farther than the average person. So if you look into something and it doesn't make sense, if you can't connect the dots, if it doesn't feel right at a gut level, there might be something wrong. And it's not you, it's them. So trust your instincts. And I'm missing a couple of slides here. I don't know how that happened. But I'm going to talk about a couple of good things because I've been ranting for a minute. Good things, what things is a ledger potentially good for? Proof and transfer of ownership. So it turns out to be pretty good for money. We know that one. It's also good for things like title and land registration. Transferable records, DCI folks are doing some really cool work on that. Talk to Mark Weber if you get a chance. He's a really insightful guy. Securities are a good application. Another one that I learned of was diamonds. So the provenance of diamonds is kind of a contentious issue. And there's someone, I think it's called Everledger, that's doing something with tracking diamonds on a ledger, and that's awesome. Another good thing to use a blockchain for is proving the order of events. So it's really hard to guarantee exact times in completely 100% disprovable sense, but proof of sequence is another thing. We can get very reasonably close to good times, and we can definitely get the sequence of events pretty close as well. So if you want to know who did something, what they did, and when, you can record that on a ledger, and it's pretty good at that. Another one is logging for transparency. So there are some really interesting cases for this, like developing countries who have some corruption problems, and companies that have data, and the people are abusing that data. They're requesting the data and using it for not necessarily good purposes. And if you set up a ledger and you log the access to that data, you can kind of prevent some of that, especially if it's a public ledger and it's tamper-proof. Keep some of that in check. I think Estonia has a blockchain called Guard Time that they're using for this purpose, and as a citizen, you can go and look and see which government agents, I may be slightly off on this, but which ones have accessed which of your data. This is a really powerful concept. And this is good because having immutable public records really helps to decrease corruption and fraud. So the bad, let's go back the other direction. If you Google good uses of blockchain, most of what you'll find is worse than useless. The web is like a big echo chamber on this topic, especially at a business level, but even in technical circles. And a lot of things that have absolutely nothing to do with ledgers and smart contracts are being promoted as blockchain applications. There are some things that ledgers are not good at, like it's not a good communication bus. You're not going to use it in place of Signal or Slack or Skype or something like that. Generally not all that great at storage and retrieval. They're optimized for, remember, protecting the integrity of the data, not necessarily querying it. And scale is another problem. Eventually, maybe we'll solve this one, but right now, if you think about credit card networks, they're doing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of transactions per second, and Bitcoin is limited to 7. And if you change the parameters there, you reduce the goodness of the consensus algorithm, effectiveness. So then there's this ugly part that we really need to talk about, which is confidentiality in blockchain. A blockchain has no special powers to preserve privacy. In fact, most widely used ledgers are public. They're designed for transparency and so that everyone can verify the correctness, authenticity, and integrity of the data. They are not for keeping secrets. It takes a great deal of care to use them without somehow identifying oneself by correlation. The instant you record any secret or personally identifying data on a public ledger, you've compromised your privacy and potentially your security. If there's anything you want to keep secret, it almost certainly should not go on a public ledger. Encrypting the data that you want to put there doesn't really solve the problem either. First, it just creates a new, very difficult key management problem. When you encrypt something, you use a key. In order to decrypt it, you or the person you want to share it with needs to have a corresponding decryption key. In order to keep the encrypted data secret, you need to keep the key secret. If you want more than one party to be able to decrypt it, you have two bad options. You can share the key with multiple parties. This is as insecure as sharing passwords. It flat out defeats the purpose. The other option is to re-encrypt the data with different keys for each recipient. But this is also a bad idea because remember, it's expensive to record things onto a blockchain on purpose. It's part of how we keep the integrity of it. So you actually don't really want to record the secret once, let alone many times. And the second reason encryption doesn't necessarily save you is that cryptographic algorithms tend to be predicated on the computational infeasibility of reversing them by brute force. An algorithm that's considered safe today is unlikely to be safe in the future, depending on how far you look down the road. In a way, encryption is a race against Moore's law. In addition to that, there are always people trying to crack algorithms, and sometimes they succeed. If you want to keep a secret, don't record it on an immutable public ledger. I want to share with you guys the worst blockchain idea I've ever heard, ever. This is the worst one. Pay attention to this. Putting your decoded genome, your DNA, on the blockchain because health, privacy. Yeah. Think that's HIPAA complaint? Maybe.
Is it a covered is the blockchain a covered entity? So,
what are the things that you should be looking at here? What are the opportunities and the good that we can take from this? If you look at legislation and enforcement of law, very often we're dealing with designing disincentives for bad behavior, punishment. One of the things most exciting about this new class of cryptographic protocols huddling under the umbrella of the blockchain, blockchain, is that we can design incentives for good behavior while mitigating a broad class of bad behaviors. They just can't happen. We design systems that prevent them, and then we reward people for doing the right things. And this may be a fundamental advance in the nature of how society is organized. We can't change human nature, and we can't design perfect systems, but we can probably do an order of magnitude better using distributed tamper-proof ledgers. So there's a desperate need here for critical thought. I want to ask everyone, as you're working on stuff in the conference and ideas and legislation and whatever else you guys do, consider what could go wrong very carefully. Think about unintended consequences. It's sometimes helpful to explicitly think about that. And think a few steps ahead. If you have this, then what are the possibilities that open up from there? So I would also challenge everyone to learn the basics of cryptography and information security. At a high level, it's not all that hard. There are just a handful of concepts. And learn to think in terms of security goals and threat models. That's also very helpful. So I think that's it. We really need law to align with technology now more than ever. So please give it your best. Thanks.
Not so fast, mister. No. Come on up. It's shy. Blockchain demystified. Some myth busting, some level setting, and hopefully some good ideas about how to recognize a business case, maybe a legal fact pattern, let's check, for which blockchain capabilities are a good fit, and maybe not such a good fit. All right, so just, I think we're going to sort of separate, we'll sort of encapsulate Christian and blockchain, and then next up will be, great, Brian and Shauna, you're getting a lot clearer, so why don't we see if there's any Q&A, or questions, comments, ideas? Let's meet halfway. So name and quick question.
Wallace from Strickland Atlanta, New York. Carmel Wallace from Strickland Atlanta, New York. That's great. The talk is great. It seems to me one of the core issues is identity. Whether you have an encryption key, someone else has an encryption key, whether you're party to an agreement. Can you talk a little bit more about where you see blockchain helping with identity?
Yes. So this is pretty interesting because Drummond Reed from Sovereign is here somewhere. And those guys are doing amazing work on this. They got a grant from DHS that was about studying the applicability of blockchain to identity. And before I came to MIT, I was working on an identity startup and also was applying for that grant. And I kind of personally gave up on it because we got into it and I didn't know how to apply for a grant and say it doesn't really apply except for maybe these two little things that it turns out to be really, really good for. And Drummond got the grant. And those two little things are things like proving key ownership or disseminating keys, and also revocation. So revocation of a key. Like if someone steals your key, if it's compromised, you need a way to tell everyone. And the best way to do this is to have some data structure that's replicated and you know it's verifiably good and everyone can have a copy of that. So I think blockchains play a small but very critical role in identity. And we need to be a little more cautious about what we try to do with identity on them. You can't just take your driver's license and throw it on the blockchain and all the things that go along with it. Is that a good answer?
Anybody else? Okay, one more. Great. It's can you raise your hand again? Oh, great. Name and very rapid question.
Hi, Judy Reinerson from KNL Gates. What about using permission private blockchains for holding data? Because that's what I'm hearing about.
Sure, that's certainly a valid kind of thing. The most interesting part of blockchains is the fact that you can have them be open and public, or not necessarily open and public, but between untrusted parties. If the parties don't trust each other, then you need this kind of fault tolerance algorithm. But even in these cases where you want to keep stuff private, it's important to think about data minimization. What if you're hacked? Where do you want this data to live? Where do you want it to be a single point of truth and be the place that is protected from harm? And it turns out if you start to Equifax, if you compile all this data in one place and it's all very, very sensitive, you create a honeypot. People want to get at that. They want to attack it. And so there's an incentive to try and break that and steal it. So it's still useful and valid to think about what kind of data you're recording in the ledgers and who has access to them, even if they're private, and so on.
Last question, if any. Great. You know the drill, all that, right?
Hi, my name is Adam, and you said that encryption is a race against Moore's law, and I've also been reading about quantum computing and how it has the potential to crack encryption keys in seconds in the future when that becomes a viable technology. So my question is, how do we protect sensitive information in the future?
Yeah, so some of the concerns about quantum are overblown and some of them are really valid. That's not my area, so I don't really feel, I don't want to put myself way too far out there on that one. But there are algorithms that are known to be more or less safe against quantum type attacks. In fact, the Bitcoin curve, elliptic curve, Bitcoin uses elliptic curve cryptography, and there's a specific curve that it uses that has certain characteristics that are good for blockchain and good for the ledger, but it's not necessarily the most safe curve. And in fact, it's suspected that it may be vulnerable to quantum cryptography. And for that reason, you'll notice that public keys don't appear on blockchain as much as addresses do. And an address is basically a truncated hash of a public key. It's intended to not disclose the public key in a way that makes it vulnerable. So we still have to mitigate those things.
We learned that the hard way on a hack. Maybe we'll talk about it at lunch tomorrow when we do some rapid prototypes. We did a digital signature prototype using the key pair from public blockchain, the same algorithm and curve that you get in Bitcoin and Ethereum, SECP 256K1. And we discovered the hard way that actually sharing, I'm just used to the RSA sharing the public key. Well, it's a public key. That's what I learned in, you said in the 90s at the American Bar Association Digital Signature Guidelines. It turns out, that's not always good advice. With some curves, it doesn't make sense. So there is some, I'm glad that you asked that question. We can start to surface some of the limits of some of these core technologies, like baked in, and stuff that ought to be at the top of mind of lawyers. Just like public keys and identifier. It's also the way that you can encrypt things to people. It's the way people sign things, signature, legal. Good to know. So let's see how many of these gems we can surface and note and share with one another in our Google Slides. So that, thank you so much for sweating these slides out, making cartoons and laying it on the line for the law. Thank you, Kristen Smith. And thank you. And since we're on a roll, it's my extraordinary pleasure to introduce friends and colleagues who teach me a lot about artificial intelligence from IBM Watson. And I'll allow to introduce themselves, Brian and Shauna, but I do want to say quickly, as people come up, who are members of our program committee that helped bring this whole thing together. It wasn't me and it wasn't Sandy, it was this remarkable group of people. And we'll all come up together and talk to you, but Brian and Shauna were champs from the very beginning, all the way through on all these Friday calls and all these resources, all the sponsorship of Sketch. So thanks for helping bring this whole thing together. And won't you please educate us now about how to identify what this AI stuff is and how we use it with the law.
We will take it.
Thank you.
Right in town.
Yes, thank you, Dawson.
Thanks. All right, well, thank you all for the opportunity to present here today. We are the co-leaders and co-founders of the Watson Legal Practice at IBM. And we focus not so much on practice of law use cases with regard to AI, but on business of law applications, and we'll define what we mean by that. And today we're going to talk about what AI is very briefly in legal context and in the context of cognitive computing, which is IBM's flavor. We'll talk about blockchain and the confluence of blockchain and AI, and why these two technologies have thus far been presented as separate and equal monoliths, and that's going to come to an end. And then how to evaluate a set of intellectual tools for evaluating a good use case or scenario. Do you want to say anything?
You know what, let me grab the clicker so we actually start on our slides. Okay, maybe that. Okay, so we're a little off the sides. So, you know, I might take just a second and talk about how Brian and I founded Watson Legal at IBM. So about 5 years ago, I know that you're probably doing the same thing. Many of you in the room probably saw, you know, Watson win Jeopardy. And I was just like you, I was sitting there watching Jeopardy going, okay, this is super cool. I was with my preteen daughter, and she was really excited about Watson winning. And I looked at her, I said, you know, I'm gonna go work at IBM and build robots. And she kind of rolled her eyes at me because she's preteen. And she went walking off. Well, within a few months, I had started interviewing with IBM, and I was hired. And I was excited to meet my vice president I work for now. And when I first met him, my first words out of my mouth after they asked me who I was I'm here to build Watson Legal. And he looked at me and he said, what is that? So as we started to form the practice, Brian had the same idea. Brian was with one group of the company, I was with another. We formed our ideas together, and we have now a team of many, you know, out building AI solutions for attorneys worldwide. So it's a lot of fun.
All right. You can't tell with the color, that is a library. So let's begin with a fundamental question. What's one of the most significant promises or perhaps hopes associated with artificial intelligence? Looking to the near-term future, we think that one of those promises, one of those hopes, is the ability of a machine to achieve subject matter expertise in multiple fields of knowledge simultaneously, multiple legal practice areas, for example, and to identify unanticipated trends and correlations that produce new discoveries and new efficiencies. I don't think the importance of this can be overstated. Suppose a machine could achieve simultaneous expertise in tax law, accounting, finance, economics, behavioral economics, evolutionary psychology, etc. What would it see? What would it tell us when it was able to read broadly and understand in context the information across those various domains? Today, human intelligence is limited to discrete areas of specialization. And the most accomplished individuals among us, except for probably people here at MIT, they can only be an expert in one or two fields. But how would a machine consider a problem if it could consider it through the lens of many different areas of expertise simultaneously, perhaps thousands of different areas of expertise?
My favorite thing, talk a little bit about silos here. So like most organizations, law firms and corporate law departments have siloed, balkanized IT environments. Adding AI to e-discovery, legal research, matter management, many of those different processes is a step in the right direction. But unless the data in these different systems can be analyzed simultaneously, the promise of AI will go unfulfilled. In other words, just including AI in an existing solution is definitely not enough. Okay. So we find at IBM that blockchain is the fundamental promise to AI. We will discuss today how and suggest a simple initial framework for how to evaluate AI and blockchain use cases, and such that they have a greater chance for success. We'll talk a little bit about all the workshops we've done, but we have kind of figured out a methodology to a bit of what could be a madness.
But first, let's qualify our terms. And bear with us, this is as technical as we'll get and as basic as we'll get, but we do feel we need to get a little technical and a little basic so that we have a common foundation for the rest of our conversation. So to quote the Harvard Business Review, contracts, transactions, and the records of them are among the defining structures of our economic, legal, political systems. They protect assets, they establish and verify identities, and chronicle events. Today, economic activity takes place on business networks. In other words, networks of companies that work together to accomplish certain common goals. We think about buyers, sellers, contractors, and subcontractors in a commercial real estate project. They come together in the marketplace where they exercise their rights and entitlements to assets. And asset ownership and transfers are the transactions that create value in a business network. Transactions involve various participants, buyers, sellers, etc., bear with me, whose business agreements and contracts are recorded in ledgers. Every business keeps its own records, which live in many different ledgers across both individual businesses and, of course, entire business networks. It's incredibly messy. Reconciling those records is time-consuming, prone to error, discrepancies result in disputes, and the need for very expensive intermediaries. Blockchain has already been, by Christian, and we won't repeat what he said, but it's a distributed ledger technology, allowing any participant in the business network to see the system of record, a meta system of record, if you will. And it's radical because it facilitates a single source of the truth, potentially.
So if we take this and break it down into several key concepts, Christian actually provided you some great definitions. And we'd like to go ahead and continue on with those definitions and clarify some of the things we have up here on the slide, smart contracts, for example. And I'll read off the definition just so that we have a good basis as we go into our working groups a little bit later. A smart contract is a piece of code that is stored in the blockchain network on the participant's database. It defines the conditions to which all parties to the contract agree. Certain actions are automatically executed without intermediaries. So today, as we talk about privacy, the history of transactions, essentially a transaction log, is shared between participants, permanently recorded in a sequential chain of hash-linked blocks. This is immutable data storage. And a couple of the words you'll hear a lot today is going to be, again, as we continue to talk a little bit about hash, but then I've heard immutable, I think, probably about 20 times already this morning. So, and then lastly, we have consensus. So consensus ensures that the shared ledgers are exact copies and lowers the risk of fraudulent transactions. Tampering would have to cross-play exactly at the same time.
But now that we're in cognitive computing. So every cognitive use case has 4 elements in common. They understand, they reason, while the technologies that facilitate the use cases, they learn, and they interact. When we say that these tools understand, we mean that, yes, they understand structured data in fielded relational databases, but they also understand unstructured data, images, voice files, or audio, but primarily narrative text, the words on a page in a book, or a contract, or a judge's order. They understand what we mean by what we say. And traditionally, this has been profoundly difficult for computers, which could only take us at face value. Except for using bags of words, they would only understand the literal meaning of the word. And even as they improved upon that ability, they still lacked context. And what I mean by what I say in the context of a given practice area, in the context of my industry, in the context of my company's dealings with my company's customers. And that elevates these technologies to a degree that just was not possible before, certainly not to do it with with warm human bodies at scale. These tools also reason. They put forth evidence-weighted recommendations for action based upon hypotheses that they form behind the scenes. And there are thousands of ranking and scoring algorithms working to vet these hypotheses until a recommendation or an insight comes to the fore. And these tools learn so that you can interact with that insight, if you will, and provide feedback into the tool, allowing it to become more contextual, allowing it to become an organic extension of a business going forward. All of these capabilities depend upon large volumes of data, except perhaps for interaction. And the concept here is less related to blockchain, more related to cognitive and Watson. The idea that until now, we've approached computers and machines on their terms. The difference being that now we can interact with them, they understand us, and they're able to, more than in the past, facilitate a relationship, us and them, where they approach us, occasionally on our terms, or at least we can speak more along the same lines as we've been able to in the past.
Yeah. So this actually may be the answer to what Christian was talking about in searching blockchain. AI may be the answer. So many of you have probably heard that more information was created in the past 2 years than during all of recorded history. But did you know that in 10 years, the amount of the world's data will double every 12 hours? So as we see here on the slide, we see right now, in the past just 1 minute, 4,100,000 videos have been viewed. I think most of those are by preteens. 3,300,000 posts on Facebook. I don't know how many of you have actually posted since we've been here. I think I see some tweets going on. I've tweeted a couple times. So if you haven't yet, feel free to go ahead and do hashtag MIT Legal as you're here. MIT Legal Forum, sorry. But every 60 seconds, it is just tremendously gaining momentum. And as we see in 10 years, every 12 hours, it's going to double. With more companies and law firms turning to blockchain and more data stored in distributed ledgers, there's a need for advanced analysis methods, which is where AI comes into the picture. Blockchain can help us verify, execute, and record. AI can help us understand, reason, and learn to identify meta trends in the same way that an abundance of pixels creates a higher resolution image and reveals secondary images we may not have noticed at the lower resolution. AI loves data. The more data, the better the model. Also, because AI is only as good as the data that fuels it. AI that leverages blockchain technology represents AI with provenance. AI that actually can't trust. AI and blockchain represent an entirely new paradigm.
Comprehending the meta context, all those secondary images, being able to understand the nuance of language, being able to understand the nuance of whatever it is that you're trying to analyze, but the connections between them. Recognizing signals versus noise and evaluating more possibilities than you could otherwise evaluate. You can see how this idea, this notion of vast amounts of information intelligently analyzed to synthesize new insights, which we discussed at the beginning, can be, it's no panacea, can be, but at least meaningfully facilitated by blockchain technology.
So next we're going to cover what standards can an organization use to evaluate these technologies. How do you scroll down? Okay. So as I've mentioned, Watson Legal was formed within the past few years by Brian and I. And we focus on augmenting the business of law rather than the practice of law. This was a strategic choice and honestly not one that we made. This was made by our clients. Once we gave our clients a framework for evaluating the most impactful application of cognitive computing as judged by business benefit, they were the ones that prioritized the business of law use cases over the practice of law. We've conducted over 100 different use case development workshops with corporate legal departments, law firms, and government entities in multiple countries. I know this year you've been in China, I've been in Russia, you've been in the UK. We can probably name many of the major countries out there. At each workshop, we identified 10 use cases, then prioritized them based on our clients' goals and our technological capabilities, intersected to produce the maximum business benefits. We ended each workshop with one single prioritized use case. So we then went back to the lab and ranked all the use cases from all workshops globally. The top-ranked AI and blockchain use cases had the following common sense characteristics.
First, from a blockchain perspective, at a high level, you should consider investigating a blockchain use case in greater detail, and this is just initial, this is just foundational. If a business network is involved, it can be an internal or an external business network, and the answer to at least one of the following questions is yes. Is consensus used, or should consensus be used to validate transactions? Is an audit trail or provenance required, or should it be? Must the record of transactions be immutable or tamper-proof? And should dispute resolution be final? These are some of the first level considerations. And there are many more and more nuanced considerations once a use case passes this first baseline test. And what about artificial intelligence? What about cognitive computing? The best use cases address a clearly recognized business opportunity or pain point, back to the hammer looking for a nail scenario. There are so many technologies out there that are or claim to be AI, which itself, of course, has no standard agreed upon definition. The best chance of success that you have, if you're willing to explore this technology in the relatively early days of it, particularly in a legal context, is to align it with something that matters to you. something that's already top of mind to you, and that's associated with a complex, high-activity process to ensure the example. These use cases have a cognitive element. Understand, reason, and learn. They do things that people have tended to do, analyzing and surfacing insights, but then weighing them against others, not necessarily taking action, though. We don't want to be accused of the unauthorized practice of law, which is another reason we focus on business of law applications. And they use the data that's available. It's available. And the content sources of that data are likewise available and relatively easy to get to or to license if the data is third party. One of our top ranked use cases is a reduction of outside counsel spend. We created a solution called Outside Counsel Insights, and we're using Watson we went through this process, Watson technology, to read the narrative unstructured portion at the line item level, where 10 different lawyers can describe a similar billable event in 10 different ways. But volume is important. So what are the highest volume areas of litigation or within a certain company? And then how accessible is that data? Invoices are very accessible from e-billing tools. And do they have a cognitive element? Well, yeah. I mean, for large P&C carriers that are analyzing, or in-house departments are analyzing 8,000 to 14,000 invoices a month, they don't have a complete picture of the life cycle of a case or across cases. So what are the meta trends? And that's an example of a use case running through that analysis.
So, and then we actually took it a level deeper and used the following metrics to rank each of the use cases. The first one being client organizational benefit. We looked at that medium and low impacts to the business. The next one was end user benefit. Then we had strategic alignment, and then also speed to implementation.
About speed to implementation, if you could go back. So some organizations have an appetite to do something transformative. Other organizations don't. They prefer a quick win and that their vendor earn the right to move forward from there. But we've seen the spectrum. But one of the things that we've paid attention to, or tried to pay attention to, is where do patterns of interest and feasibility from a technical perspective tend to cluster? Client wants to do. How do you identify what can be done with cognitive in the legal space? Some of it no one's ever done before. Some applications are very straightforward and obvious, others perhaps less so. So speed implementation, end user benefit, all of this is really about wrapping the technology around a business's needs, tailoring it to them rather than approaching them with a technology to solve a technology problem. They have a business problem. We tailor these technologies to our customers' business needs. The language that's spoken, the ontology that the tool learns, that context that we mentioned earlier, in one insurance company, it's going to be different than in another insurance company. So never before, and this is not just IBM obviously, but never before has there been a scenario, I think, where vendors are able to deliver such value to clients, but only if you engage with us and do more front-end due diligence, us and those like us. And that's going to shift the relationship and the dynamic a little bit, rather than showing up with a product in a box.
Yeah, it truly is a partnership.
So an example of a use case that we've been considering from a blockchain perspective and a cognitive perspective is conflict checking and conflict clearing. Near universal need in North America when it comes to law firms, not just law firms. And right now they rely on reference data to determine if there are any relationships involving the firm's current or past legal matters that are adverse to a client in a new matter. The data that helps them make that determination is usually stored in a digital Rolodex, just names. No intelligence, no ability to understand the various, or learn the various ways that the name of an entity can be described based upon context. If it's not clear, a subsidiary, a lawyer. Not only that, but these tools, pardon me, I need glasses, I'm getting old. They're unable to produce a global view of every contact's contact, the network. How does it break down? How does one lead to the other? So how might this work? Each participant would maintain their own data set within a blockchain network. Now, this could be internal, an internal business network. This could be, for example, a large law firm with offices throughout the United States and perhaps other countries. Associates move very frequently now, they're more nomadic than ever before. Or it could be something a little bit more grandiose. We would create a single view of the entire data set, verified attorney and client identity, and any modifications that would come later, any updates would be stored, available in a permission basis to interested parties. And we'd use cognitive on the blockchain, we'd use cognitive on blockchain to learn and analyze variations on entity names, attorneys, clients, companies, relations. You know, we're doing this right now with anti-money laundering, where the legacy technology right now is something like 80% false positives, and a lot of that turns around identifying variations on a theme of entities. Ultimately, identity is what we're talking about. The benefits would be, some of them are obvious, a consolidated, consistent data set that reduces errors, but near real-time reference data, yes. But improved client acquisition speed, reduced disqualification, reduced malpractice, reduced reputational harm. So blockchain will help unlock the fundamental benefits of AI, and AI in turn will help make sense of a galaxy of data that's inherently associated with blockchain technology. And it's important to explore these technologies broadly and creatively, but not so creatively, pardon me, throat dry, but not so creatively. It's also important to have some kind of structure going into this process so that we're not flailing. It's also important to understand that these technologies, many of them, can deliver value right now, actually. And they're already doing so, if you're law firm attorneys, in the industries that your clients that your clients come from, in some cases in very significant ways. So well, we need to explore, and we need to explore with structure, getting a sense of how we frame the practical utility of these technologies at a very fundamental level will help us achieve a place where we're able to derive value from these technologies sooner rather than later. So you've begun that exploration here. We all have together today, and we look forward to spending the next 2 days with you as you evaluate this technology and as you begin to think about it in the context of your own firms, and as you bring, and organizations, as you bring us ideas and challenge us. Let's challenge each other. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. See, I promised you the good stuff. All right, so questions, comments, ideas? All right, James. Still have to introduce yourself.
James Miller. I'm curious if you could answer sort of an applied question, sort of an applied problem that you've seen sort of in the practice of architecting these solutions. One of the things that I think troubles a lot of practitioners and people sitting at a desk trying to get work done is platforms are largely legacy in a lot of environments. They're not in a form that, you know, and you sort of touched on the idea that, you know, sort of the data backend and trying to piece things together. Certainly there's ways that people do that effectively. MuleSoft and other things I think are great products. But do you sort of take the perspective that you have to start with a data warehouse and sort of a modern sort of data-centric IT sort of structure? Or can you move from an application sort of oriented environment? How do you cobble these together? And what sort of technologies are more amenable to sort of a more hybrid solution than something that's like, you know, throw out and then rebuild everything with new Home Depot?
Can I out you a little bit? Like your context is, so attorney, is it at FC? Yeah, FCC, and does great work. He's also one of the great legal hackers in Legal Hackers Group, and he's very serviceable data scientist. He like taught data science at the Legal Hackers Global Summit in Brooklyn last summer. So he's coming from that perspective. But the thing I would glean from that is, well, wow, big, difficult enterprise, complex federal enterprise of a regulatory agency, and that's I think partly why he's asking.
Well, and I think the complexities is one of the reasons why we started out with kind of a simple, boring use case. I mean, we're working with invoicing and bills. That is not what Brian and I came in thinking that we were actually going to be doing. When we went and had Well, we started out with a few workshops and we ended up with over 100 because we were really trying to figure out how to move the needle, not only just in the way that you had just mentioned, being able to, I mean, there's so much data that we can go after. We really had to focus down in on what was accessible at this moment. Invoicing was easy.
And when we did, we were connecting to discrete data sources. You know, yes, I think that if you're dealing with a kind of meta context or meta trend use case, absolutely, you require a data lake, data mart approach. But otherwise, and the majority of the time, we're still connecting to discrete sources.
Yeah, and that may, instead of boiling the ocean, I think that's one of the things that we would recommend is start to look at some of these smaller use cases. They may not be as sexy, they may not be as fun, but it's a good, you know, way to kind of jump in so you're not jumping in the deep end.
Well, and to qualify, it's not sexy or fun, but well, I disagree. I actually think it's pretty fun. This is
you think invoicing is fun?
Well, here's what I think is fun. So you set this up so perfectly. So we didn't mean
thank you.
So the industry standard savings for competitive tools, 4.5% reduction in outside counsel spend. We're doing 20 to 33%. So, you know, that is where
I guess if you think a $392 million savings is
in that
sexy,
case,
I guess it is. I never thought about it that way.
Proving the sound, sober business value.
Nobody has been so excited.
Well, I didn't see any of that.
No, so yeah, so I think it's the moving the needle in little ways instead of jumping in and building your first robot. Yeah.
So to speak, yeah.
To get a next question. Here you go.
Thank you. I don't think I was actually first with the hand up, but I was closest, so that was lucky. My name's Pip Ryan. I'm a barrister from Sydney, and I'm also a lecturer at the University of Technology. And I loved your presentation. Thank you. You sounded as though you were a little sorry that it was the business of law that had been chosen for the work as opposed to practice. But I was listening to your presentation thinking I would be terrified to try and do what you're doing on the practice of law. Do you feel the same way now, or are you champing at the bit to go to that as well?
Well, maybe we have different opinions. How do you feel?
I think we actually will probably agree a bit on this one. You know, I would love to jump into the practice of law because I think that our citizens in so many cases could really use artificial intelligence and also the transparency that blockchain brings us. 80% of our citizens in the United States do not have the ability to have legal counsel because they can't afford it. And so I would love an opportunity to help them with the practice of law and with some of those simple things like building forms. You know, some of the things that we've seen by, you know, some of the AI that's been developed. Joshua, a student from Stanford, has created Do Not Pay, assisting with UK citizens with over $5 million in savings on their, traffic bills. So there's a lot of good use cases and options for that. I think on our end, we needed to kind of move that needle on return of investment, and invoicing was a great way to do it.
Volume again. So one of the, if it were a practice of law use case, and we've considered them, and we are doing some of them actually, but we often ask, what are the highest volume areas of litigation, for example, in a given geo or in a given practice area? That way, you know, there's the broadest possible value that we can deliver to the broadest number of clients. We're relevant. It also drives down costs, but it has the benefit of there being just a tremendous amount of data to see nuances and variations on the theme of scenarios. There is more of that kind of information in business of law applications or business of law scenarios, it so happens, than in practice of law scenarios.
Yeah. Well, and a great place that we found in the invoices within the narrative, there's so much good, juicy information for Watson to learn that as Watson starts to really understand the nuances of the languages within the invoices and specifically within the narrative, it's a great place for Watson to start with that learning. And then we can add at that point pleadings, we can add motions, we can add the rest of the bodies of law for Watson to then learn. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name is Enya Titova. I'm a legal design resident at IDEO, and I was a litigator before that. So I kind of have a very specific question about your conflicts check scenario that you presented. And the litigator in me kind of gets nervous and wants to know sort of how do you de-risk exposing existing conflicts in a law firm database? Sort of the law on conflicts is so fuzzy and still developing. And especially with respect to, you know, sort of what is consensual waiver and things like that. So, you know, lawyers are known to sort of be very risk averse. So how do you know when is the right time, and how do you convince lawyers that it's okay to deploy this technology without sort of opening this Pandora's box of existing issues?
I think the answer to that is, so this is a use case that we put forth to bring here to spark a conversation, one of the lightning conversations that we might have tomorrow. We're looking for your feedback. So this is a volunteer use case that we want to explore together. To the degree that that's fuzzy and gray, we don't have an answer to that question. We'd like the advice of lawyers. Actually, this is an example, ideally, really, of vendors and practitioners and scholars working together.
Yeah. So we're trying to tame the Wild West, we'll say.
Yes, sir.
Or whoever has the...
I have a mic.
Oh, yes.
And then we'll switch over. I'm Jules. I'm from Lunacat Ventures. So I'm looking at investing in the most exciting legal tech companies out there. And I know that Ross and some of the other entrepreneurs out there are licensing Watson. Are you seeing more of that? And if not, or even if so, what are some of the areas that should be using Watson for entrepreneurs to create kind of more radical solutions?
We have a list. As we have over 100 information from 100 workshops. So,
Well, we certainly have with Watson, which is an approach where we license the technology, the building blocks to clients. Those clients are customers. They build solutions for themselves. And then our business, our practice focuses on actually going out and building and designing those solutions and selling them into the marketplace.
And we're able to,
well, of course, but we're able to take advantage of IBM's scale to help with R&D, frankly. So certainly we're seeing both. We are seeing a lot around insurance and law-related insurance use cases. And I don't know how specific I can get without giving too much away, but I'll tell you one, and it's pretty common sense, so I don't think it's giving anything away, which is the cost to settle a lawsuit based upon an underlying claim is 3 times more expensive than the cost to settle the same dispute when it was a claim. So early predicting, and there's been software that's been out there that's tried to do this for a long time and has actually achieved it along a spectrum, which claims are likely to become lawsuits by using cognitive to understand, to read settlement agreements, to read initial pleadings, to read claims files, etc. Is a potential use case here. And there are many different ways that you could go about scoping that use case.
Yeah, well, and AI differs depending on who has built it. IBM, excuse me, we spend about $5 billion with a B every year in R&D. And so the Watson that we get to play with is pretty cool. The Watson that some of the companies have maybe put into place earlier on, or some of the versions of Watson. Watson right now is over, 60 different things, everything from, we've got our building blocks. We can kind of go through those a little bit later if anyone has any further questions. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of good companies coming on board using Watson, using other AI tools to really answer the needs that we see and the pain points in the marketplace. So.
And that they see, yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Is there a next
I
question?
think we've got one more.
Almost out of time.
Okay.
How's it going?
Very good.
Outside.
Oh, okay.
My name is Yonatan Lawrence. My background is in language modeling, and
oh, very cool.
And I'm a little bit curious. You mentioned in your description of cognitive systems, with respect to IBM, you sort of had these 4 categories: understanding, reasoning, learning, and interaction. And I'm a little curious about understanding. So I think one of the biggest concerns with AI is trust and accountability. And I'm curious how you guys measure understanding.
Well, by the business result. We go in trying to help a client achieve a certain very specific business goal. And if the result achieves that, and there's a baseline, and it achieves it by X percentage over that baseline that we define with the client on the front end, in terms of what the criteria for success are, it's very idiosyncratic, in other words.
Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to the understanding. Watson has to be trained. Watson, when you get it out of the package, is about 5. And so as we like to say, Watson's currently going to law school. Watson just learned all the financial services regulations. In the medical area, Watson has graduated medical school and has read 23 million journals or something, exotic like that. So we're doing that also in the legal space as Watson's starting to head down that path of hopefully getting his law degree here soon. So, but yeah, that has a lot to do with the understanding because he can't understand what he hasn't been taught.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Any? It's now or later.
I guess we'll be around.
Later.
Yeah, we'll be around.
Are we good?
Sure.
Okay. So thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
IBM Watson for legal. Can I grab one of your lavaliers? Whoever is easiest to get. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So now I'm going to ask. So we've got one more thing to do before a sumptuous lunch, and that is. Sorry, I disappeared down here because I have to monkey with the slides a little bit. Let me pull this up. So this is, oops, boom. So we're calling it Lightning Talks on the breakouts and the workshops. So what's going to happen next? I'm going to ask Brian if you'd come up and Gurvinder, and everybody that's doing a breakout session, Tony, Pip, all y'all, come on up. Oh, definitely Michael. And for the most part, what you're going to hear is like a 1 or 2 minute lightning blurb of like, this is what we're talking about. All of them should start with a fundamental area of law, or I might even interrupt it. It just needs to be like bankruptcy, talking about blockchain and asset registry, property, talking about encapsulating the value of a carbon credit, supply chain, talking, etc. So that's what we're listening for, and then get a feel for the topics, who's talking, what discussion you'd be interested in going to. Talk to people over lunch if you're interested to follow up. We're all going to be going to lunch right after the lightning talks, and that's the intention is to socialize that a little bit, think about it, and then you'll select yourselves into the breakouts in the far room. We've got 11 banquet tables that sustain about 9 people each, and we found that's about the maximum that can sustain a meaningful dialogue. And 4 of those tables have monitors, and so if any of you really feel that you need slides, you need to be looking at stuff as part of what you're doing, I'd say go and grab the monitor table, first, or talk to one of the organizers. And as a reminder, we're going to ask that somebody, in addition to these facilitators, ideally that isn't the facilitator, also take notes. So they might try to nominate somebody in the session. You could also do it as a shared thing. And we're putting all those notes into the same slide deck, as I mentioned earlier. Alrighty, so to get started, why don't we start with Tony and Pip, if that's okay. And why don't you introduce yourselves and just say, real quick, outline of what your breakout session's about.
Hi, everyone. My name's Tony Lai. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called legal.io. We're building infrastructure to make legal services more accessible.
Hi, I'm Dr. Pip Ryan, and my PhD explored the liability of third parties for breach of trust. I've also been practicing at the bar for 15 years, and I'm on the International Standards Organization Smart Contracts Working Group and on the Standards Australia Blockchain Technical Committee. Again, I'm heading up smart contracts.
So as a lawyer and a legal technologist, one of the things I'm confronted by is how I can ethically introduce AI into my practice. This is a cause that I share with many of the lawyers all across the country who I've been talking to, who are keen to try and utilize technology in an ethical way as part of delivering their legal services. Now, as Shauna and Brian pointed out, there is the specter of unlawful practice of law, and regulators all across the country, all across the world, are in fact looking at the ways in which lawyers can ethically, in compliance with their fiduciary duties, help clients in a way that gives due understanding and a level of responsibility to their duties as lawyers to look out for the true interests of the client, and to what extent this may come into conflict with an AI system that they don't have full accessibility into the workings of. And so Pip's going to describe here one of the scenarios that we're going to go through in terms of trying to address some of these legal ethics issues when it comes to how you can apply AI.
Okay, so speaking to Shauna's suggestion that the reason why she would like to go into the practice of law with Watson Legal, which is to tap the unbanked or the unlawyered market. So this is the group who aren't so poor that they can get legal aid, and they're not so rich that they can afford a lawyer. So it's people like me. And so what you want is for this middle group who want a lawyer, you want to be able to provide services to them. So you've set up a law firm, and what you decide to do is automate some of the advice. There are two arms to this. The first one is the fully automated robo-advice. So your robot is using artificial intelligence to inform how it's going to advise, and it understands the advice that it's being asked to give because of voice recognition technology, all powered by natural processing language services and informed by artificial intelligence. The problem this particular group has is they've got to get underneath the hood of the data and also the people programming how that data is then going to be filtered. So if it was Watson Legal, for example, you'd want to get under the hood and know exactly how that was being driven so that you can defend it in court, because your primary duty is to the court and then to your client. So we've set up the scenario. We're going to pose those questions. We want to be lawyers in that room, but we want to talk about blockchain. So the second, do you want to talk about the second scenario?
Is this correct? I don't think we had it on the sheet, but it's legal ethics scenario.
So that's the legal ethics scenario,
great.
correct.
Boom,
And then
okay,
the
and hit the
one,
second one. What's it called so I can pull it up?
Okay, so the second one we're going to call ownership of personal data.
Okay.
That's the area of law. And what we want to look at is not necessarily just self-sovereignty, but the idea that there are organizations that are collecting information. They're collecting personal data. Some of that may be private personal information. It could be metadata about your movements as you use your handheld devices that are internet enabled. It could be your medical records, your correspondence on social media. And the important thing to note here is what we want to explore in this particular scenario is sometimes you're creating the data about yourself, your post on Facebook, your email. Sometimes other people are creating it about you, your medical records, or they're tracking your metadata. The question is, who owns it? What are the obligations and what can you do with it? What can you not do with it? Of course, this is going to be jurisdiction specific, but we'll build that into the discussion.
Here, here. Great. And that's going to be day 2, we
That's
think.
tomorrow.
And a good fit for the identity stuff. All right. So thank you, Pip and Tony. So if you're interested in that, mingle and to chat with them over lunch and go to their session. Could I ask you to provide the mic to Bob Craig right behind me here? All right. So next up, Bob Craig, who's also honored member of our program committee. Be hearing more from us at lunch before the lunch talk, and who's agreed to do some heavy lifting on the scenarios. Bankruptcy.
It's particularly heavy lifting because I'm not a lawyer. I'm the CIO for Baker & Hostetler, have been for more than 20 years now, and in the legal industry for 26 out of a career that's longer than I care to mention. In any event, the bankruptcy scenario is really a bit of a thought experiment. So I'd encourage those lawyers who are here, if you want to explore some of the practical possibilities of where blockchain could come to bear on a complex process. So the idea essentially was to find a scenario that had lots of parties involved. And these parties don't particularly trust each other in the context of a bankruptcy, but they have to trust the outcome of the process. So you have lots of legal entities involved making claims. You have lots of lawyers representing those legal entities. You have a bankruptcy court, and then of course you have the bankruptcy trustee. And so we'll explore from a couple different dimensions where blockchain might be able to come to bear on that process. I just thought it'd be awesome to hash it all and put it on a blockchain, but Christian kind of blew that all up. So we're going to actually have to think. So the good news is I've lawyered up. I have 2 terrific lawyers who are going to kind of co-moderate. Oren Warshofsky is a partner with Baker & Hostetler. And we have Nina Kilbride.
Come up here.
And Nina and Oren, show yourselves.
Where's Oren?
Oren, come on.
Okay, come on. Because otherwise people won't know what you look like and who to talk to.
Sorry, Oren. I was going to try and have this be low key.
It's not
but
required that you come up, but please come
up. Oren is a partner at Baker & Hostetler. He has been intimately involved in our representation of SIPA and the Madoff matter. So he's got some interesting bankruptcy scenarios to bring to bear. And Oren will focus on the kind of the process of the bankruptcy proceeding as a scenario. Nina Kilbride is a director of legal engineering at Monax, has some really innovative thoughts around the whole notion of legal engineering as it relates to smart contracts and blockchain. And Nina's scenario is really dealing with a fact pattern that involves cryptocurrency in the context of a bankruptcy, which I think is fascinating. So I think I'll leave it at that. It should be fun.
Yeah, and illuminating. Thanks, Bob. Bankruptcy. You'd think with the blockchain, this could all go a lot better. So let's do the math and see how. Brian, Thomson Reuters Labs.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Brian Ulisny. I run the Thomson Reuters Labs in Boston. We're one of 7 labs globally. So I'm neither a lawyer nor a tax accountant, but this is coming from our tax and accounting business. So we, of course, provide financial, legal, tax, and news information to professionals worldwide. But this is an interesting scenario that I wanted to talk about from Richard Ainsworth at BU Law. I don't know if Richard's here today. No. But he's basically set up an interesting scenario for a proposed architecture for doing, setting up an architecture for VAT tax collection and so on using blockchain and AI, and proposes this for the Gulf Coast, which is going to a VAT tax. And so the idea here is basically that, as you know, so in VAT taxes, as goods are enhanced, materials are enhanced, and the value of a product is increased, you pay taxes on the difference between what you received and what you produce. And currently, the VAT tax regime in Europe and so on enables a lot of fraud. So that there are frauds that you can commit by sort of delaying your reporting or not reporting correctly, and then you can collect monies that you're not entitled to. Ainsworth's scenario here is illustrated by a number of manufacturers. Here, these blocks at the bottom, A, B, C, D, they're various manufacturers and businesses across the Gulf Coast, and they're producing these goods and services, and these transactions are being monitored and sort of adjudicated by these nodes that form the consensus protocol for the blockchain, and they're using AI, and they're saying, we think, each node will say, I think this transaction is legit and should be, and the VAT that should be applicable is such and such amount. When the consensus is reached and enough of these nodes agree on the VAT analysis, then it's put onto the blockchain. And Ainsworth's suggestion is that the number of nodes that are distributed here should be proportional to the GDP of the countries represented. So the purpose of the scenario of the session that I'm going to be leading is to kick the tires on this architecture, see what people thought, see if what sorts of risks and opportunities you see here, and think about whether this is the way to go.
Great, thank you. So Brian, VAT, very mechanistic, seems like a good fit for something computational. Chris, if you could introduce yourself and your scenario and your breakout.
My name is Chris Jaggers. I'm the CEO of Learning Machine. Our topic will be official records that are owned by people and directly used in the world. Our company works with school systems, governments, and companies to issue official records to people in a digital format that they can own and use directly when applying for subsequent education or jobs. We co-chair the W3C's Credential Community Group. And this brings up interesting topics of cross-jurisdictional issues when you're using an official record that's relying on decentralized verification of its authenticity.
You have to use the word diploma at MIT. Like, just tell people.
So even though the technology can support any kind of official record, one example that just came out is MIT began issuing their diplomas doing this.
On blockchain.
On the Bitcoin blockchain. That is inscribed with the student's public key so they can prove ownership of it, signed by MIT's private key so the provenance can be demonstrated. And these students from the initial groups for the MIT Media Lab and Sloan School of Business, they can use these documents anywhere in the world and rely on decentralized verification, and MIT is going to be expanding it to more groups as we go on. That's just one example of many.
Yeah, thank you.
So if you want to talk about that and more, join me after lunch.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to go to, thank you. So this is a good example. Can you think of official records that come up in your life and your business? This is interesting. Okay, who wants to go next? Harrison? Oh, do you want to start with the work? Do you want to start with the work? Oh, so why don't you start with your small session and then do the workshop? And yeah, I guess I'll say, okay. I love the idea of like the, like the starting team all up at once, but you can go and sit down after your talk. It's all right. Okay. If you introduce yourself and your team and the, I think the automated legal entity one.
Got it. Hi, everyone. My name is Harrison Pearl, and I am founder of C4Coin. I'm here with my team, and we are going to be leading an online session today. So it'll be at 1:15. And we're going to be exploring what does it mean to automate a legal entity. So the area of law is partnership law, corporate law, and understanding what would it mean to give officer roles to a computer, what rights would that computer have, can they incorporate their own entities and then sue and be sued. So that will be the small online session that we're leading. My background is in accounting. So I'm not a lawyer.
Cool.
Come from an entrepreneurial and accounting perspective on these topics.
Yep. So we're going to get a little bit GAPy, a little bit IFRS-y, kind of get real up in here. Thank you very much.
Gappy
Gap-ish.
sounds like some sort of
We'll go
unfortunate
shopping.
condition.
And so actually, not so quick. So come on up. Is Dan Harpel here? Dan Harpel? No. Okay. Yeah. So and now there's a second thing happening, and it's going to be a workshop, a little different format, a little bigger. Won't be limited to people around a table. We'll do it in the big classroom across the way. And Michael Casey is going to be leading that with a couple of other superstars. So Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I think most of you met me earlier. Harrison's setting up quite nicely because the project that we're working on to some extent is going to require understandings of the roles that machines and the rights that machines play in this circumstance. I am definitely not a lawyer, and therefore I'm looking upon this, I'll be completely frank, as an opportunity to get a little bit of pro bono legal advice. We think, a very exciting research project underway, and hopefully you will agree that it's worthy of pro bono advice. And that is, we're looking at some of the devastated regions of the Caribbean right now, where there is, as you would know, literally no grid, and thinking about whether this is the right opportunity to go into them and experiment with an idea that many of us have been talking about for some time, this notion of energy democracy, that we could actually rebuild the grid from scratch to really emphasize what many people now see as a great value proposition, a decentralized architecture, not only because of the resiliency that a decentralized grid would give rather than these vulnerable centralized systems, but also because empowering users within the system with smart devices and the capacity to decide when and what to develop in terms of generation capacity, their own solar generators and so forth, and then trading it amongst themselves in an open, price-driven market environment should extract, we would think, based on standard market economics, so much more efficiency from our energy usage and energy construction in a very constructive way. So we're going to experiment and go down to these places and set these things up, but it obviously raises a whole host of interesting legal questions. How do we represent rights to ownership of that grid? Because this grid may or may not come from just ganging together homes' solar panels. It might be that there's collective ownership in a common community grid. How would we, could we collateralize those claims in some way? How would we represent them? And then, with Harrison's help through C4Coin's interest in carbon credits and these sorts of things, are there ways in which we can take this into some sort of international realm? There's questions about the relationship between the public utilities, these legacy institutions around which regulation has been traditionally developed. How do we interface with them? Should we? So ultimately, yeah, we're looking to find a way to really design a different looking electricity grid based on this technology, a smart grid. Yeah. And how do we, make it legal? Did you want to add something?
A couple of things. So again, this will be about Michael's project of a distributed solar microgrid, and then Dan Harple and I will be coming in. So Dan Harple is going to talk a little bit about maintaining data provenance or data veracity from an off-chain source and bringing it onto a blockchain. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between private and public blockchain implementations and what issues those bring up in terms of token and network ownership.
Yeah, the interface between those private and public domains in this particular structure.
Right. Yeah. I think there may be. I mean, Public Utilities Commission, consumer protection, like it's replete. This is like skeet shooting, target practice for issue spotting. So please come spot issues. It's going to be a workshop format that we are good at, if I could say, and Michael's good at in the Media Lab. It'll go a little bit longer, and we'll workshop it and see. And then what will happen next is, you're going to go to the Caribbean and do it. So join us and learn. Oh, great, coming up. Who else? So Cassius Law, who else is doing? I just mentioned a few people to get people up here to get the idea that it's time to talk. Who else is supposed to be up here that isn't up here now, that hasn't talked, but you think you're talking, you want to be talking? Anybody? Okay, so now's the time. All right, so let's do Gurvinda next, and then we'll go right down the line. Here you go. I'll pull up your slides, Gurvinda.
All right, thank you. So as the slides are coming up, just a few warm-up comments. I was on the stage just a few months ago.
Okay, they're up.
Previously in my IBM persona, and one of the slides. Can I just chop it forward? Slideshow, whatever it is one more. I like to invoke the work of Ronald Coase very often. It provides a very good description to put all the mess that we see around technology into the proper perspective. And a few months ago, I had only maybe the first 1, 2, 3 icons, and preparation is the next the 2 icons over there. The idea being how the nature of funds and other entities is being reordered as a result of now blockchain, which is just the most recent technology kind of disruption that we are seeing. And what is going to be the nature of the firm in this 100 years from 1937 to now, or to 2037, if you project forward, and what are the possible entities of the firm, and how does that test out the theory of Ronald Coase around firms and markets and law, as well as existing frameworks of law. So if we move to the next one. So I go into supply chain. I've been doing supply chain work for quite some time, specifically or more generically blockchain for the last about 4 or 5 years. Work was with the core team at IBM previously, and that was standing up the blockchain use case, incidentally, on IoT. So for those of you who are familiar with the IoT space, it ties actually very closely with the supply chain space. One way I look at it, and I'd like you also to look at it, is from the perspective of 3 flows. There's a physical flow, there's a digital flow, and there's a payments flow. Part of the magic and part of the challenge for all of us is how do we converge these 3 flows? It's quite a mess right now. So how do we bring those 3 flows together? And in the mix of that, there's also all these new entity forms that are. So
can you hit provenance before you stop previewing?
Yeah. So provenance is one of the burning problems around supply chain, right? Other burning problems are dispute resolution, double spend that was being discussed around and how to avoid that. Provenance specifically is one of those big loaded terms. What do we mean by it is what I want to unpack in the session later today. And specifically, what I want to do is kind of debunk the myth that seems to be floating around that if you put a blockchain network, you automatically will have provenance, right? So we want to get rid of that myth. But then that begs the question, what else? What are the elements of provenance? If you're able to move to the next slide, Daza. So what are the elements of provenance? And I want to look at this framework a little bit more depth. I'm not going to say this is correct. I'm not going to say this is exhaustive, but I want to get the juices flowing sufficiently that we can improve on certain structures and certain frameworks like this. Provenance at a minimum means origin. It means access. It means custody, all the terms that the lawyers can better speak about. It means jurisdiction. It means possession, so on and so forth. Some of those icons I've tried to represent. And provenance doesn't mean just tracking. It's one big element of it. But tracking and tagging technologies are really not new. Yep. So what else does it mean is kind of what we want to cover. Yeah. It should be pretty clear by now. I don't come from the lawyer side of the house. I come from the systems and architecture passion of the house. That's where I kind of look from. But yes, I do come from a family of lawyers, and one of them, my wife, is right here.
Yeah. And we've got a few power couples here where it's lawyer engineer, you know, like the philosopher kings of the next generation. So Gurvinder is one of them, and it's great when you both come. There's multiple of these. So thank you, Gurvinder. Wow, you're kind of blowing me away. The slides have come a long way. So there you go. Supply chain, Gurvinder. So we've got a couple more. Let's do James.
So again, thanks for the introduction earlier. He mentioned some affiliation with the FCC. I am an attorney there. I'm not speaking on behalf of the federal government, so don't get confused and think that all my mistakes are attributable to anything in the administration. They have their own. We're going to be talking today in the public sector session at 1:15, mostly about rulemaking. And I think what we'll observe are that in many ways, the same sorts of stresses that we see in other sectors with scale and the scope of problems expanding, big data, those sorts of things, we see those stressing how government functions. And so in the public sector, we have a number of particular constraints and particular sorts of trust problems and things like that. We'll be talking through maybe how some of these technologies are in some ways both for creating new problems, but then also are obviously things that we can leverage to help fix them. So I hope we can mix in some of the trust and transparency, and maybe there are privacy issues and all sorts of other stuff. But it should be a fun section talking about public sector stuff, rulemaking. Super exciting, even more exciting than bankruptcy.
It is.
Do you want to talk about tomorrow also for pedagogy and data science?
Just say like a quick squib.
A quick squib. So he mentioned that we had been looking at what is the legal hacker, both identifying what they do, what sort of pedagogy sort of strategies can help to create people who are modern information workers in the space where law and computer science have converged. We'll talk a little bit about that, maybe more in a workshop, maybe do some ETL kind of things. I used to be more of a localization network guy, so you might see some Perl and regular expressions in that session.
Yeah, it's really great. Like, this is where we learn. So thank you, James. Great. Rulemaking, and it's a number of people have said, by the way, including Sandy, has been pressuring me for years now, figure out how law can be made in ways that are data-driven, in ways that are that can take sensor input by design to see how well are we performing. Is the law achieving its purpose? Is there a need to adapt? Can we build that into the rulemaking process? That's a hard question, but slow progress is being made. Some people looking at that in a municipal context, and James is particularly well suited to be able to help us make progress on rulemaking. It's also called just governance of our social compact. So yeah, it's exciting. Okay, Phil on litigation. All right.
Thank you, Daza. Hi, I'm Phil Rosenthal. I'm the president and co-founder of FastCase, and we also do the AI Sandbox. I actually am a physicist, though, from Caltech. I don't know if that gets me in trouble here, and lawyer too. But we're going to be doing a big, messy class action tort regulatory compliance problem. But I want to talk about what we're trying to illustrate. And really what it is we want to try to shift the center of the universe. Let's do small things. Now, what I mean by that is you know that if you're in a law firm or corporation, if you're on the legal side, typically all AI, really all technology is read-only, right? You get whatever software you get, you can click the buttons you're told, and that's it. Now, they're wonderful, amazing tools. but we know that, and the litigation will show it, some of the most basic questions. What should I settle for? How long is this going to take? You get anecdata these days. And it's very bizarre. And the problem is that the center of the legal universe is typically the big publisher or technology company, and that's where the center is. Now, it's very bizarre because the greatest database in the world is what you have at the firm or at the corporation, because you got all that good confidential stuff, the settlements, the actual billing information, and yet it's not being extracted. Now, the problem is it's so often unstructured, and that's where folks like IBM Watson come in, of course, and Brian Kuhn is going to be very honored to be joining us for this program to talk about how that can help with these scenarios. And so it's also, the other problem is the silos that I talked about, right? To really get the insights, you need to put all the data together. Public data, third-party data, your private data. So what if we can invert the model? What if we can make the firm or the corporation the center of the universe and have everyone put their data, deconstruct the tools, put whatever's needed under the firewall, right? So everything can be together, because that confidential data is not going anywhere else. So everything else should go there. What if we could do that? And then AI is no longer read-only. Then the folks at the firms can be the makers of AI and make wonderful tools. And this is really a community effort of all of us. And there's a lot of companies involved doing this, because we got to get all the pieces in there. So what we're going to do is look at actually a company that was putting nuclear material in watches. Actually happens, and cancer claims and regulatory problems. But what does that mean in terms of the beauty contest, in terms of running the litigation, all the questions, many of the questions that come up, and ways that we can use AI to start going about answering them with this new model. And I look forward, and thank you.
Great, not so fast. So I just had an epiphany. I'm sorry if this is already known, but it sounds to me like you were talking about going from artificial intelligence and part of this paradigm, which we love, Sandy and around we love, of having the core data situated in a environment where it's clear what the ownership and control is. We get a lot of performance and intrinsic capabilities in cloud services, and they're great. Not great for everything. For very sensitive, high value, mission critical other data. Maybe there's other things that are appropriate. So your concept of bringing it into like a data lake or to something where it's owned and controlled, where you can go much deeper and look at the facets and the features and the dimensions of the data, very interesting. And it made me think, okay, so now what we're talking, the intelligence now is attorney intelligence. That's the new AI that you're starting to explore, I think. Right. Or it's the old wisdom applied in a new way. So let's do that. I would like that pull-down menu, please, soon.
Got it.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Phil's litigation. Talk to him about that. And now, last but not least, people that in a really cool law firm that yearns to be digital and integrated, not a big firm, and we work, we have our offices together in Cambridge Innovation Center, and we sometimes talk in the kitchen about, God, why? What's up with this mess of like all these emails? Many of you may have noticed, especially in internet land, it's hard for me to respond to all the emails. It's hard for everybody. And the attachments here, or did it come through the form and is in the file? Why can't this be integrated? Why can't it be automated? So before you talk about your session, I want to thank you for writing such a great paper for this conference about automation and integration of law offices that I decided, and we talked, but we're going to make up proceedings of this conference. And there's a few other people that had some conferences. We'll put a call out for people, through other people at the conference that have given some papers and some good like Medium posts. We'll put a call out, and we have a Google form where you can upload them. We'll allow some time afterwards, but yours is in fact, you sparked it. So we'll send around by email at the end of the day their papers so everyone can read it, and we can start to talk about this and the vision that you have for getting there and transitioning the law from an office perspective, especially a small office in immigration practice, but really all of us to that digital world that Sandy was talking about. But first, we have a particular topic, and so your scenario is immigration, right? Immigration. So hit it.
So I'd like to thank Daza and really the whole community for bringing us all together. I'm an immigration attorney turned, oh, Rachel Cassius. I assumed that we were up here, so I guess not. So Rachel Cassius, I am the owner and founder of Cassius Law. We assist researchers, entrepreneurs, companies in obtaining visas, permanent residence, citizenship, really the whole myriad of business immigration work. And really what I found in my practice was the fact that I was just recreating the wheel with every case. We have systems in place. I have a form software that I use. We have just tools that are not integrated. And I had the wonderful, really luck to find Dr. Bieberman, who is just a brilliant mind, electrical engineer by training, did a postdoc at MIT, who actually just had a successful exit from his company, so I get to rob him of his brilliance. But really, we're looking to understand the digital transformation in law, and specifically looking at the immigration perspective. Nice. He has a big head, so this is a breakthrough. So based on the large number of stakeholders within the immigration process, you have government entities that have a key mission to decrease fraud, maintain the immigration rules, and then you have companies who are just trying to navigate this maelstrom of regulatory issues, but then also timing. We deal with a lot of pharmaceutical companies who need minds from different countries, who right now are dealing with certain executive orders that are vetting previously non-criminal people who, like, why are we putting so much scrutiny on researchers when clearly they're here to do good work. So basically our whole project is to understand how we can bring technology and lawyering into an automated system where we can upload documents into the cloud. And really, what if we could just send a case to USCIS through electronically and have them access it in the portal instead of printing things out that were once in PDF to then have it just get sent out by mail, and then having the process then get scanned, the documents getting scanned into a scanner. And this is what immigration is doing every day. So very outdated things.
See who you are.
And it's important we were here to compel you guys to put your genetic sequence on the blockchain.
So we can identify you for deportation.
This is the best idea of today. But yeah, thanks again, thanks Daza, and for everybody for organizing this. I think this is an awesome kind of collaboration of all these different skill sets that are coming together, and some of these themes are just really great and unique probably to this conference. I think as Daza and Rachel mentioned, there's also beyond this there's some obvious things out there. People are asking like why isn't the system electronic, right? I mean, if I can do my bank transactions electronically, why can't I submit something to like a government entity, right, as a lawyer electronically, things like that? And another big part of this is there's a lot of these different tools. I mean, there's a lot of exciting technologies that we're looking at here, right? There's blockchains, there's AI, there's all kinds of stuff, automation, right? All these things. And there's already other technologies that are actually already proven, have been around for at least a decade, giving people positive ROI. Talking about cloud computing, big data analytics, virtualization. Even we talked a little bit about e-signatures and things like that. And the big question for the attorneys in the room that have their own firms is, how does all this technology, how do you personally ingest it, right? Not just understanding how the technologies work and kind of how it fits into like a global landscape, but as a firm, as your own firm, right? How do you ingest it? How do you use it? How do you become the kind of leaders in this technology, themselves? And this is it's a difficult problem because some of the things that that we talked about, you're right, the IBM guys mentioned, the silos. and including data silos, but also silos organizationally, within. Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about this. We're going to do these, these lightning talks, and we're happy to, lightning, yeah, and happy to engage the community, and thank you for the head, Daza.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, because we're MIT. Yeah. I'm barely MIT. You're fully MIT, but we do speak frankly and lovingly, but frankly to one another. I encourage us all to speak frankly and come to it quickly and see if we can make progress. Before you go, and we have the last ringer here. I want to make sure it didn't escape. There's a quote in your paper that really summarizes a lot of the gestalt behind what you were saying. It was that CIO quote from JetBlue. Can you say it? Listen to this.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. So what he says is, the quote is, he sees IT and digital transformation not as like a siloed, skill set to some specific people in your organization, but as like a global tool set that you can use. Everybody, right? All the stakeholders can use.
Addition. So I want to see green cards, passports on blockchain.
Yeah. There you go. Thanks. So this is a great session because we can remake the law with these folks. That's what we talk about in the kitchen over there. We can talk about it here, circle up, make progress. Let's do that. Thank you for coming. I know it's a work day and you've got a lot of things to do, so appreciate it for everybody. Okay, now last but not least, Don Thibault, Executive Director of Open Identity Exchange, among other things, and one of our identity aficionados, the Identirati. Tomorrow is going to be primarily about identity. Today's more about contracts and setting the tone. And so Don has a seminal use case as well that'll be convening a breakout around, and it's air travel, if I am not incorrect.
I think Daza's enthusiasm was that this use case touches everybody in the room, and I think most of the topics that we've talked about yet. So the International Airline Transport Association has a vision, which they call One Identity. But the use case is each of us walk through the airport without breaking our stride. So if you think about Sandy's beginning, where we live in this world of digital breadcrumbs, or perhaps more accurately, this torrent of digital signals that we are delivering via our smartphones and surround us in an airport, from a security point of view, from a retail point of view, from a governance and government point of view, the IATA has a clear and present problem right now. They need to reconstruct the identity system that is the infrastructure for international travel. So recently, the Russian Federation has insisted that all personally identifiable information in passenger name records be housed in a server in the Russian Federation. The Trump administration has said that at the end of 2018, we'll need a positive identity check for exit. Of course, the US requirement cascades throughout regulatory and governmental agencies around the world, where we'll have identity checks on the way in, identity checks on the way out. So the multi-stakeholder environment is that of airlines, airport authority, regulators, all trying to sort out a new piece of infrastructure that will provide the governance for this business, legal, and technical framework.
Our favorite, that's the BLT sandwich right there.
The BLT sandwich. That is enormously complex and a particularly wicked problem. So the IATA has been convening workshop after workshop, trying to sort out the trust framework that will guide the new kinds of technology coming through biometrics, the new kinds of regulatory requirements coming from the Trump administration, the EU's GDPR requirements for privacy, et cetera. So you have in this use case your personal travel and many of the issues that Daza and others have talked about. So it's a real world problem. The IATA folks are looking out for help. And the most difficult thing that we've had is engaging legal counsel from the airlines, from the governmental authorities, from the airports authorities, trying to create this trust framework. Of course, the obvious solution for so much of this data, and for the trust among untrusting parties is some kind of distributed ledger. So we invite your input and your thoughts into the workshop that we'll be doing.
Bang. Thank you. Don Thibault, Open Identity Exchange. Awesome. All right. So quick show of hands. We could do a little bit of Q&A if there's any urgent questions about what's happening or anything like that happened, or we could. I loved the sound, the buzz of dialogue when when Sandy needed to speak, we had to start this thing. We could just go right back out to the reception area, have some dialogue, and in about 15 minutes, lunch starts. You can make your calls, meet your people, and then at lunch, we've got Casey Coleman and also the program committee will be speaking a little bit to do some more framing and to make sure everyone's sorted out for the session. So let me just ask, just quick show of hands, is there anyone that has any quick, like we're a little bit early, which in my book is good, but are there any questions or issues or problems, ideas that must be spoken now? Hearing none, I would like, by my authority, adjourn the morning session, and we'll stand in recess until basically the next session after lunch when we'll start the breakouts, and then we'll have a special session. We'll have a special lunch speaker with Casey Kuhlman. And what we'll ask is when we get into lunch a little bit, when you get your food and your chat, we're going to ask that people actually filter back in here to hear Casey unless we come up with a better idea. All right. So thank you, everybody. Morning adjourned.